I used to think my life was good, simple maybe, but good. My name's James Mitchell, and for the last 12 years, I've been married to Clara. We live in a modest 2-story house in Cedarwood, one of those quiet suburbs where everyone waves hello but nobody gets too involved in your business. We have 2 kids, Emily, who's 10, and Jacob, 7. They're my pride and joy. I work as a structural engineer, spending my days designing buildings that are meant to last. It's a demanding job, and the hours are long, but I do it for my family. Clara's a stay-at-home mom for the most part, though she dabbles in graphic design work on the side. She always said it kept her creative, though I never questioned what she did with her time. But lately, something's been gnawing at me. It's hard to explain, but I feel like there's a distance between us that wasn't there before. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe I was just tired. Work has been relentless lately. But the signs were there if I'd been paying attention. The way Clara's phone seemed to buzz more than usual, how she'd smile at her screen and quickly put it away when I walked in. I wanted to ask her about it, but I didn't. I told myself it was nothing. After all, Clara and I had been through so much together. Building a life, raising our kids. We were solid, or so I thought. Looking back, I see now that I'd been ignoring the cracks in our foundation. I didn't realize it then, but everything I thought I knew about my life was about to change. And not for the better. The unease lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake. Clara seemed distracted more often, her laugh a little too forced, her eyes distant when she thought I wasn't looking. I tried to dismiss it, convincing myself that maybe she was just tired or stressed. 2 kids, a busy household. It wasn't easy for either of us. But the small things began to add up. Her late-night phone calls became more frequent. Sometimes, she'd step out onto the back porch or disappear into the bedroom, closing the door behind her. When I asked who she'd been talking to, she'd wave it off with a vague excuse. Something about a friend from her design circle needing advice or catching up. Just work stuff, she'd say with a quick smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. One evening, I caught her sitting on the couch, staring at her phone. She didn't see me watching from the hallway. Her thumb hovered over the screen, hesitating, and then she set the phone down like it was a guilty secret. "Clara," I called softly, stepping into the room. She startled, clutching the phone to her chest. "Oh, James, I didn't hear you. What's got you so jumpy?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light, though the knot in my stomach tightened. "Nothing," she said quickly, too quickly. "Just a weird email from a client. Nothing important." I nodded, but her answer didn't sit right with me. Clara wasn't the type to get flustered over emails. I told myself not to push it, to trust her. She was my wife, after all. If something was wrong, she'd tell me. Wouldn't she? But as the days passed, her behavior only grew stranger. She started dressing up more, even when she wasn't going anywhere. She'd spend extra time on her hair, spritzing on perfume she hadn't worn in years. "Feeling fancy today?" I teased one morning, watching her swipe on lipstick. She glanced at me in the mirror and laughed, though it sounded hollow. "Just trying to keep things interesting," she said with a wink. I forced a chuckle, but the nagging feeling wouldn't leave me. Something was wrong, I just didn't know what. It happened on an ordinary Thursday evening, the kind of day that didn't seem like it would change everything. I came home late from work, exhausted and hungry, but the house was oddly quiet. The kids were already in bed, and Clara was in the kitchen, her back turned to me as she washed dishes. "Hey," I said, dropping my keys on the counter. "Everything okay?" She glanced over her shoulder with a faint smile. "Yeah, just a long day. Emily had a science project meltdown, but we figured it out." I nodded, grabbing a glass of water and heading toward the living room. That's when I heard it, her phone buzzing on the counter. Clara had set it down while she worked, and the screen lit up with a text notification. I couldn't help but glance at it. "Call me when you can. I miss you." My chest tightened. I looked back at Clara, who was humming softly to herself, oblivious. I didn't say anything then, but the message sat heavy in my mind all night. Something didn't add up, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. The next evening, my suspicions were confirmed. Clara didn't realize I was still awake when she stepped out onto the back porch with her phone. Her voice was low, but the urgency in her tone caught my attention. I crept to the window, the curtains shielding me from view. I know. I haven't told him yet, she said, pacing back and forth. I frowned, straining to hear. Yes, I'm pregnant. Of course, I'm happy about it. I'm just glad this child is yours and not his. Her words hit me like a freight train. I felt my stomach drop, the weight of her betrayal crashing down on me. Pregnant? Whose child? I stumbled back from the window, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Pregnant and not mine. I hadn't even known she was expecting, but apparently I wasn't supposed to know. My mind raced, 1,000 questions swirling as anger, betrayal, and disbelief roared through me. I couldn't go back inside, not yet. My hands shook as I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, staring blankly at the sink. The woman I trusted, loved, and built a life with had lied to me in the most unforgivable way. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I stayed up long after she went to bed, sitting in the dark with my thoughts. I needed to process this to figure out what I was going to do. But one thing was clear. Nothing would ever be the same. The next morning, Clara was cheerful, too cheerful. She hummed a tune while making breakfast, her usual routine undisturbed. Meanwhile, I sat at the table, sipping coffee and watching her every move. I wondered how she could act so normal, as if the previous night hadn't happened. Pancakes today, she said, flipping one onto Jacob's plate. Extra syrup? Just the way you like it. Thanks, Mom. Jacob grinned, oblivious. Emily sat beside him, poking at her scrambled eggs, lost in her own world. I forced a smile, though it felt like my face might crack. Smells good. Clara turned to me, her eyes bright. You look tired, James. Didn't sleep well? Something like that, I replied, keeping my tone even. Inside, I was anything but calm. Her question felt almost mocking, though I knew she didn't suspect that I'd overheard her conversation. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand answers in front of the life we'd built together. But I held back. Not here. Not in front of the kids. After breakfast, Clara ushered Emily and Jacob off to school while I stayed behind, pretending I needed a late start at work. As soon as the door closed behind her, I grabbed my phone and began searching for any sign of what she'd been hiding. Her texts were password protected. I tried a few obvious codes, our anniversary, her birthday, but nothing worked. Frustrated, I slammed the phone down on the counter. I sat there for a while, staring at nothing, until an idea struck me. If I couldn't get into her phone, I could at least start paying closer attention. Clara wasn't as careful as she thought. If she was hiding something this big, there would be other clues. That evening, I watched her more closely than ever. Her smiles seemed rehearsed, her laughter hollow. Every time her phone buzzed, she glanced at it quickly, her expression shifting before she tucked it away. Everything okay? I asked casually, trying to mask the edge in my voice. She looked up, startled. Of course. Why wouldn't it be? No reason, I said, shrugging. Just checking. Her eyes lingered on me for a moment, searching. But then she smiled and went back to her book. As the days passed, I became a shadow in my own home, observing everything while pretending nothing was wrong. I began keeping a mental log of every suspicious move she made, every whispered phone call, every unexplained errand. The more I saw, the more my anger grew. I wasn't sure what I would do yet, but one thing was certain. I wouldn't let her betrayal go unanswered. A week passed, and my suspicion grew with every passing day. I felt like an intruder in my own life, watching Clara as if she were a stranger. The woman I thought I knew had been replaced by someone I couldn't trust. One evening, after Clara went to bed, I finally saw my chance. She had left her laptop open on the coffee table. The screen was locked, but I knew her password. It hadn't changed in years. My hands trembled as I typed it in, half expecting it to fail. But it worked, and her desktop sprang to life. Emails, files, browser history, I combed through everything. Most of it seemed innocent at first, but then I found a folder buried deep in her drive, labeled work. My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside were saved emails and messages from someone named Ryan. The emails were casual at first, conversations about graphic design projects and collaboration. But as I scrolled further, the tone changed. Can't stop thinking about you. Last night was incredible. I miss you already. When are we going to tell him? You deserve better than this. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Ryan wasn't just some coworker or client. He was the man Clara had been sneaking around with. The man who might be the father of the child she was carrying. My mind raced as I scrolled through the messages, piecing together the timeline of their affair. It had been going on for months, possibly longer. Every late-night phone call, every errand that took longer than it should have, every unexplained smile. It all made sense now. I slammed the laptop shut. My jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. Betrayal coursed through me like a poison, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't confront her yet, not without a plan. The next day, I called in sick to work. Clara was busy running errands, so I used the time to dig deeper. I checked our shared bank account, scanning for unusual transactions. Sure enough, there were charges I couldn't explain. Hotel stays, expensive dinners, and gifts I knew I hadn't bought. When Clara returned home that afternoon, she greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. I fought the urge to recoil. "You feeling okay?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "Yeah, I lied. Just needed a day to rest." "Good," she said, smiling. "You've been working so hard lately. You deserve a break." Her words felt like a cruel joke. I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside, I was seething. I spent the next few days gathering more evidence, my anger growing with each discovery. But I stayed quiet, biding my time. I knew I couldn't confront her without a plan, not if I wanted to make her pay for what she'd done. By the end of the week, I was ready. I didn't know exactly how I would execute my revenge, but I knew one thing for sure. Clara wouldn't see it coming. The days turned into a strange dance, with Clara obliviously moving through our routine while I played the part of a loving husband. Each smile I gave her felt like a mask. Each "I love you," a hollow echo of words I once meant. The kids, thankfully, were shielded from the storm brewing beneath the surface. Emily and Jacob went about their days without a clue that their parents' marriage was built on lies. I made sure they felt no tension, even as I wrestled with the urge to explode every time Clara glanced at her phone or laughed at a text she didn't share. But I knew better than to act impulsively. Clara had planned her deceit carefully. My revenge would demand the same precision. I began piecing together my strategy in secret, considering every angle. It wasn't enough to expose her betrayal. No, I wanted her to feel the same helplessness, the same devastation she had inflicted on me. It was late one evening when I found the key to my plan. Clara had gone to bed early, claiming exhaustion, and I stayed in the living room, pretending to work. Her phone was on the kitchen counter, charging, an opportunity too good to pass up. I unlocked it, knowing the PIN after years of watching her input it without a second thought. My pulse quickened as I scrolled through her messages, searching for more conversations with Ryan. They were there, just as I'd expected, but it was one message in particular that caught my attention. "Friday, 8 p.m. at the usual spot. I can't wait to see you." Friday. That was 2 days away. My hands tightened around the phone as a plan began to form in my mind. I would follow her, catch her in the act. But this wasn't just about catching her. It was about making sure she regretted every moment of her betrayal. The next day, I made preparations. I told Clara I had a meeting scheduled late Friday evening and wouldn't be home until after the kids were in bed. She barely reacted, offering a distracted, "Okay, have a good night." Her indifference only fueled my anger. I spent the rest of the day setting things in motion. I arranged for a friend to watch the kids that evening, ensuring they wouldn't be home to witness what was about to unfold. I also made a stop at a hardware store, picking up a few items that I hoped I wouldn't need but wanted on hand, just in case. By the time Friday arrived, I was ready. Clara left the house around 7:30, dressed in the same careful way I'd noticed before, like she was trying to impress someone. I kissed her cheek on her way out, my stomach churning at the thought. "Have fun," I said, forcing a smile. You too, she replied, and then she was gone. As soon as the door closed, I grabbed my keys and followed her, keeping a safe distance. The darkness of the evening felt appropriate, a fitting backdrop for what was about to happen. I knew the usual spot she had mentioned, an upscale restaurant downtown. It was a place we'd been to once for an anniversary, though it seemed that memory now meant little to her. I parked a block away and waited, watching as Clara met Ryan outside the restaurant. He was tall, with an easy smile, the kind of man who probably thought he could get away with anything. They hugged, and she leaned into him in a way that made my blood boil. For a moment, I considered storming over and confronting them right then and there, but I reminded myself to stay calm. This was only the beginning. As they went inside, I stayed in my car, the first steps of my plan unfolding in my mind. Revenge wasn't something you rushed, it was something you delivered cold and precise. As Clara and Ryan disappeared into the restaurant, I sat in my car, steadying my breath. The anger burned in my chest, but I forced myself to remain calm. Tonight wasn't just about catching them. It was about planting the seeds of something far worse. I pulled out my phone and dialed the private investigator I had contacted earlier in the week. His name was Alan Moore, an ex-cop who specialized in uncovering dirty secrets. I'd hired him to gather everything he could about Ryan. His job, his address, his routines. If I was going to take my revenge, I needed to know the man who had helped destroy my life. They're inside, I told Alan, keeping my voice low. Got it, he replied. I'll make sure the cameras are ready. Alan was parked nearby, equipped with a high-powered lens to photograph every moment of their little rendezvous. I wanted proof, undeniable evidence of their betrayal. And I wanted Clara to know I had it when the time was right. While Alan worked, I slipped out of my car and made my way to the alley behind the restaurant. It was dark and quiet, the perfect place for what I had planned. From my pocket, I pulled out a small tracker, the kind you could stick discreetly to a car. Ryan's sleek black sedan was parked at the end of the lot. I crouched down, attaching the device to the underside of his car, making sure it was secure before slipping away. With the tracker in place, I'd know exactly where he went and when. I returned to my car and waited. An hour passed, then two, as I watched couples come and go from the restaurant. Finally, Clara and Ryan emerged, laughing and leaning into each other. My jaw tightened, but I stayed put, letting them think they were safe. They walked to Ryan's car, their steps unhurried. Clara glanced around once, as if checking for something, but she didn't see me. She climbed into the passenger seat, and they drove off. I followed at a distance, careful not to get too close. The tracker made it easy to keep tabs on them without risking being spotted. They didn't go far, just a few miles to a small, secluded motel on the edge of town. Of course, I parked across the street and watched as they disappeared into one of the rooms. My stomach churned, a mix of rage and disgust threatening to overwhelm me. But I stayed focused. This wasn't the time to act. Not yet. Instead, I sent Alan a text. I've got the location. We'll talk in the morning. He replied quickly, understood. Photos are ready. Satisfied, I drove home, my mind racing with the possibilities. The images Alan had captured would be my weapon, but they were only part of the plan. Clara and Ryan had taken something from me. My trust, my family, my dignity, and I was going to make sure they paid for it. As I lay in bed that night, Clara returned home, slipping into the room quietly. I pretended to be asleep, listening as she crept into bed beside me. Her betrayal was so close I could feel it, yet I didn't move. Soon, she would know what it felt like to lose everything. The next morning was like any other. Clara kissed me on the cheek as she left for her morning errands, and I played my role flawlessly, smiling and telling her to have a great day. Inside, I seethed, but my mask didn't crack. As soon as she was out the door, I called Alan. Did you get everything? I asked. Crystal clear, he replied. Photos, timestamps, and even a video of them leaving the restaurant together. You're covered. Good, I said. Send it all to me. Within minutes, the evidence appeared in my inbox. The photos were damning. Clara and Ryan holding hands, laughing together, and embracing in the parking lot. The video was even worse, capturing them entering the motel. There was no denying what was happening between them. I stared at the images for a long time, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. But anger alone wouldn't fix this. I needed to be methodical, deliberate. The first step was financial. Clara and I shared a bank account, but I had a separate one she didn't know about. Over the next few days, I began quietly transferring money from our joint account into my personal one. Not enough to raise suspicion, but enough to ensure I had control when the time came. Next, I reached out to a divorce attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Laura Greer. I didn't tell her everything yet, only that I suspected infidelity and wanted to protect myself. She advised me to gather more evidence and document everything. "Trust me," she said. "When the time comes, we'll make sure she doesn't get away with anything." By the end of the week, I had everything I needed. Financial control, legal advice, and undeniable proof of Clara's betrayal. All that was left was to set the plan in motion. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. One evening, while Clara was putting the kids to bed, her phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at the screen and saw a message from Ryan. "Can't wait to see you again. Miss you already." My blood boiled, but I forced myself to stay calm. I unlocked her phone using the PIN I'd memorized and took a screenshot of the message, forwarding it to myself. Then I deleted the evidence and put the phone back exactly where I'd found it. Later that night, I confronted her, not with the affair, but with a subtle, calculated question. "You've been distracted lately?" I said as we sat on the couch. "Is everything okay?" She hesitated for the briefest moment before smiling. "Of course. Just a lot on my mind with the kids and everything." I nodded, pretending to accept her answer, but inside I was fuming. Her lies were so easy, so practiced. It was almost impressive how effortlessly she deceived me. The following morning, I set the final piece of my plan in motion. I printed out every photo and message Alan had gathered and sealed them in an envelope. Then I wrote a note. "I know what you've done. I hope it was worth it." That evening, while Clara was out again, I slipped the envelope onto her nightstand. I didn't wait for her to find it. I went to bed early, pretending to sleep as the storm brewed. When she returned home and found the envelope, I heard her sharp intake of breath. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then I heard her footsteps approaching the bedroom. She stood in the doorway, holding the envelope in trembling hands. "James," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I opened my eyes and stared at her, my face cold and unyielding. "You have something to say?" Clara stood frozen in the doorway, her face pale, the envelope clutched tightly in her hands. For the first time in weeks, she looked unsure, vulnerable. The sight filled me with a dark satisfaction. "James, she began, but her voice cracked. I sat up slowly, keeping my eyes locked on hers. "You what, Clara? Have an explanation? A justification? Go on, I'm listening." She took a hesitant step forward, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words. "It's not what it looks like," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I let out a bitter laugh. "Not what it looks like? So you weren't sneaking around with Ryan? You weren't spending nights in motels while I was home with our kids? Enlighten me, Clara. What exactly doesn't it look like?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a fleeting moment, I almost felt pity. Almost. "It was a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. "I never meant for it to happen." You never meant for it to happen?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "Clara, you don't accidentally end up in a motel with another man. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, a series of choices over and over again." She flinched, her tears spilling over. "James, please, let me explain." I stood up, towering over her. "Explain? You've had plenty of time to explain, Clara. Weeks, months, maybe longer. And instead, you lied to my face, to our kids. So no, I don't want your explanations. I want the truth." Her hands shook as she placed the envelope on the dresser. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, her voice breaking. "Well, congratulations," I said coldly. "You did." The room fell silent except for her quiet sobs. For a moment, I just stared at her, waiting to see if she would say anything else. But she didn't. "You're pregnant, aren't you?" I said finally, my voice cutting through the quiet like a knife. Her eyes widened in shock. "How did you—" "I overheard you," I said, my tone sharp. "That night on the phone, when you told Ryan you were glad the baby was his." She covered her mouth with her hand, her face crumbling. "James, don't," I snapped, my anger boiling over. "Don't try to deny it. Don't try to spin it. Just tell me the truth. Is the baby his?" Her silence was answer enough. I nodded, my jaw clenched so tightly it ached. "Unbelievable. James, please," she begged, stepping closer. "It doesn't change how I feel about you. I still love you." "Love?" I interrupted, my voice filled with disbelief. "You call this love? Lying to me, cheating on me, carrying another man's child. This is your version of love." She reached for me, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Don't touch me." Her tears flowed freely now, but I felt nothing. The woman standing before me was a stranger, a liar, a betrayer. "I want you out of this house," I said coldly. "Tonight." Her eyes widened in panic. "What about the kids?" "I'll explain everything to them when the time is right," I said. "But for now, you need to go." She hesitated, as if she wanted to argue, but then she nodded, defeated. "Okay," she whispered. As she packed her things, I sat in the living room, staring at the family photos on the wall. The life I had built, the life I had trusted, was gone. When she finally left, I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. But I wasn't done yet. Clara had taken everything from me, and it was time for her to understand what that truly felt like. The silence in the house was deafening after Clara left. I sat alone in the living room, staring at the empty space where her things used to be. The kids were at school, oblivious to the storm that had just torn through their family. I had one last thing to do before I could call this chapter closed. The final phase of my plan had begun. I had given Clara the ultimatum, but she didn't know the full extent of what I had prepared. It wasn't just about kicking her out, though that had been satisfying. I needed her to understand the pain she'd caused, the betrayal, the life we could have had that she had thrown away for an affair. I needed to make sure she would never forget what she'd done to me. I drove to Ryan's house. His car was parked outside, and I knew he'd be home. It was the perfect opportunity. I didn't knock. I wasn't here for a conversation. I was here to deliver a message. I rang the doorbell, my face cold and unreadable when he opened the door. "James?" Ryan asked, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What's going on?" I didn't answer. Without warning, I shoved past him into the house. He staggered back, clearly thrown off guard. "What the hell are you doing?" he demanded, his voice growing defensive. "I'm here to talk about Clara," I said calmly, my tone measured. "But more importantly, I'm here to talk about you." He stepped forward, trying to block me. "I don't know what this is about, man. But you need to leave." "Don't play dumb," I said, my voice hardening. "You think I don't know everything? The affair, the motel, the texts. You think I didn't see it all coming?" Ryan paled as the realization hit him. You've been following me?" "I've been watching both of you for weeks," I said, taking a step closer to him. "Every lie, every moment you two thought you were getting away with it. But you're not getting away with anything." I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos. His face blanched as he saw the images of him and Clara, their intimate moments captured for the world to see. "You think I was going to sit by and let you destroy my family?" I asked coldly. "You're wrong. I've made sure that everyone will know about you. Your wife, your friends, your co-workers. I'm going to make sure they all know what kind of man you are." Ryan looked around, suddenly panicked. "You can't do this. You'll ruin my life." "Don't worry," I said with a dark smile. "I'm not done yet." I turned to leave, but before I walked out the door, I stopped and looked back at him one last time. "You'll never forget this, Ryan. Just like Clara won't. The difference is you won't be able to hide from it. She'll leave you eventually, too, when the truth comes out. And when she does, I'll be waiting for her." I left before he could respond, my mind already shifting back to Clara. I had made my point with Ryan, But I wasn't finished with her yet. Back at home, I called the lawyer Laura. I'm moving forward with the divorce, I said simply. I want it final. And I want full custody of the kids. She didn't ask any questions. Understood. We'll move quickly. I'll have everything prepared by the end of the week. That night, Clara called. I let it ring a few times before picking up. James, I'm so sorry. I made a huge mistake, she began, her voice trembling. You made more than one, I said coldly, interrupting her. And I'm done listening to your apologies. Clara, I'll do anything to make this right, she pleaded. Please, just give me a chance to fix it. You had your chance, I replied, my voice ice cold. And you ruined it. Don't call me again. I'm done. I hung up, and for the first time in months, I felt like I had control again. Clara's betrayal had broken me, but now I was breaking her back. The divorce would go through, and the kids would stay with me. She'd left me with nothing but lies and empty promises, but in the end, I would have everything that mattered. And Clara? She would never forget what she had done to me. I would make sure of that.